Throughout this course, we've been working primarily with vector objects, but this chapter is all about working with raster-based graphics inside of Adobe Illustrator. And by raster graphics, I mean JPEGs, PNGs, GIFs, and also TIFFs. And these are the types of graphics that are resolution dependent. So you need to make sure that whatever type of project you're working on fits the resolution and the size requirements for those images. But in any case, it's really easy to get raster graphics into Illustrator using the Place command. So let's go up to the File menu and just choose Place. And inside of this dialog box, we'll go into the Chapter 13 folder and grab alyssa.jpg, and we'll just place that. And once we have that onto our page, we get the Place gun, and we can click to place the object anywhere we want on screen. And once I have that on screen, I'll just move it into place, something kind of like this, and then we can resize it to fit just like so. Once we have that object in place, let's move some of these other objects down a bit so that we have some room. And once we have everything where we need it to be, we now have our graphic inside of Illustrator. Now, we are going to be able to manage this file by using something called the Links panel, and we're going to be exploring that in the next movie. But just know that by default, when you place an object into Illustrator, it is linked to that original object which lives on your hard drive. So that means if you make a change to this outside of Adobe Illustrator, you will then be able to update it here inside of Illustrator once you come back to reflect any changes that you might have made. You will also notice that after you place an object and you select it, that you will see all of these options appear in the control panel. So this indicates that it is a linked file. It tells you what the file is, and when you hover over it, it actually shows the actual physical location of the file on my hard drive. It tells me the file is in RGB, and it has 82 pixels per inch. Here are the controls for embedding, editing the original, using the image trace panel, and creating a mask. In this case, we don't want to use any of those right now. I just want to point them out so that you know where they are as we start to use them in the future. So from here, I'm just going to save this out, and then in the next movie, I'll talk about how to manage your new linked assets. Once you have a new graphic placed inside of your Illustrator document, you need to familiarize yourself with the Links panel. In order to open up that panel, go to the Window menu and go down to where it says Links. That will launch the Links panel, and you'll see it come up here on your screen. Once you have the Links panel open, you can target individual links inside of the Links panel, and you get several options down here at the bottom. So let's tour those for a second. Right here, this button says Show Link Info. When I toggle that open, it's going to give me a lot of information about the current file that I have selected. In this case, the file name is alyssa.jpg. It is a linked file. It tells me the color space is sRGB. It gives me the physical location of this particular file, along with a link. If I click this link, it's basically going to just show it in the Finder on the Mac or in the Windows Explorer on Windows. You will also see that it shows the pixels per inch, the physical pixel dimensions of the file, the scale at which it currently sits in the document, the size in kilobytes, and also when it was created and when it was last modified. If it has any transparency, it will also show here. The other options at the bottom of the Links panel include Relink from CC libraries. So if you have a file stored in Creative Cloud libraries, you can easily relink it from here, making it accessible across multiple devices and applications. You can relink it to something on your hard drive, and you can also go to that link in your document. When you click on that, it just highlights the image that is linked and takes you to that point in your file. If there are any updates, you can run the update link by clicking this icon here. Currently, we've not made any changes, so we don't have anything to update. The final one is Edit Original. If I were to click this, it would take me to the default editing application for this particular file. So for instance, this time, if I click it, it's going to try to open in Apple Preview. But that's not the program I want to open it in. So I'll quit Preview, and I'll jump over into Adobe Photoshop. So let's launch up Photoshop here, and once Photoshop's up and running, we'll go and open that file. Let's go to the File menu, choose Open, navigate out, grab that JPEG file, and hit Open. Once that's open inside of Photoshop, I can do just about anything I want to it. So let's go over here to the adjustment layer icon, and inside of the adjustment layers, let's add a vibrance adjustment. Crank up the vibrance just a tad, give it a little bit more of a vibrant color. And then I'm also going to adjust the curves. Just do sort of an increased contrast preset. There we go. Yeah, maybe not quite so much. So let's do medium contrast. That looks a little better. Let's close that up. And then what I can do here is I can actually save this file out by merging all of these layers together. The problem with that is that I'm going to commit to all of those changes, so I need to keep this Photoshop file open for the time being. In order to merge these layers down, all I have to do is hold down the Shift key and then press the Command or Control key and the letter E. That's going to merge everything together, and then I'll save it with Command or Control S. It's going to give me JPEG options. I'll hit OK. Now I'll jump back over into Illustrator. I automatically see a message in Illustrator telling me some files are missing or modified in the links panel. Would you like to update them now? I can click yes, and when I do that, it automatically updates my link with the new photo. If I'm happy with it, I can leave it like it is. If not, I can go back into Photoshop and undo those changes. But I'm pretty happy with this so far, so I think we're good to go. As you continue to add links to your links panel, they will show up here and you'll be able to manage them much the same way that you do in other applications like Adobe InDesign. You will also be able to use this Links panel drop-down menu, which allows you to relink from CC Libraries, relink, go to link, edit original, basically all of the different buttons that you have down here spelled out in text form. You can also bring up the linked file info, and you can sort your links so you can show all, show missing, show modified, show embedded, and you can sort by name, kind, status, and you can access panel options. Inside of the panel options, you will be able to determine the thumbnail size. On my personal machine, I actually prefer to use the medium size because it gives me a better idea of what assets I'm currently working with. So I'll hit OK, and as you can see, it increases the size of that thumbnail, making it easier for me to see exactly what the image is. The Links panel in Illustrator is very powerful, and it's going to be your centralized hub for managing your external assets. So study it, get to know it, and use it often. Even though I highly recommend that you link all of the raster graphics that you use in your Illustrator projects, you do have the ability to embed raster graphics directly into your Illustrator docs. In this movie, I'll show you how to change a linked object into an embedded object. Now, why would anybody want to embed a file directly into the Illustrator document to begin with? Well, chances are you're going to be sending this to someone and you want to make sure that you don't have to manage external links or extra files that you have to send to them, so you just want to package it all into one single file and send it over to them. Or maybe you just don't like dealing with external files at all and you want everything in one centralized location. Either way, it's pretty easy to get your files embedded into Illustrator. All you have to do is click right here on the Embed button in the top of the control panel when you have your desired graphic selected. Once you click the Embed button, the graphic becomes embedded. You can actually see that the frame changes a little bit, not looking at all like one of the linked objects. It just looks like a regular rectangle in the Illustrator document. You will also notice if you go to the Window menu and open up the Links panel that now this is no longer a linked file. This is an embedded graphic. It will tell you down here at the bottom, JPEG embedded file. So it is actually inside of this document now. If I wanted to take it out of this document, or if you ever receive a document with embedded images that you want to remove, all you have to do is click Unembed at the top. Once you do that, you can set a destination for it, choose a file format, either Photoshop file or TIFF, and then you can save it out. Once you do that, it becomes a linked object once again. That means you can easily have access to it anytime you want. And since you saved it as a PSD, anytime you click on the Edit Original button, that's going to launch Photoshop and allow you to make edits directly to that PSD file. And since it is a PSD, those edits we made earlier with the vibrance adjustment layer and the curves, those are all going to be non-destructive because we can just save the PSD once we're finished. So let's do that again. Add in curves, do some medium contrast, close that up, save the file, jump back into Illustrator and update it, and there we go. And now I have the ability to go into Photoshop anytime I want and make any changes to those layers or the adjustment layers, and they will automatically be saved and updated in my Illustrator document. So as you can see, you can definitely embed your files directly into your Illustrator documents, but it's not something that I recommend. The workflow is much more flexible if you use linked assets, but in the event that you need or want to embed your images, at least now you know how. One of the biggest questions that I get from Photoshop users when they're switching over to Illustrator is, where's my layer mask button? Well, unfortunately, there is no way to create a layer mask inside of Illustrator. What we have in Illustrator is something known as a clipping mask, which basically takes a vector shape and turns it into a mask for whatever object it's sitting on top of. Let me show you an example. Let's say, for instance, that I wanted to change the layout of this page, and I wanted a circular version of this photo to be right above all the profile information. In order to do that, what I would do is grab the ellipse tool over here on the left. Then I would drag out an ellipse roughly the size of what I wanted it to be, move it in, and size it accordingly. So let's just raise this up just a little bit. And I want to make sure that I don't exceed the height of the original file, something kind of like that. Then I'll select the underlying object by holding down the Shift key and clicking on it. Once I've done that, I now have both objects selected. I can go up to the Object menu. I go down to Clipping Mask and choose Make. When I do that, you see that the image is now confined within that vector shape. I can double click on this at any time, and I can actually move the photo around inside of the shape. I can also target the shape, and I can shrink it down or make it larger, depending on my needs. In order to exit this, all I have to do is double click. Let's say that I showed this to the client and they really weren't happy with it. They want to go back to the original rectangle aspect ratio. All I have to do is right-click the file and choose Release Clipping Mask. When I release the clipping mask, the circle is still there, so I need to select that and get rid of it if I need to. But in the event that I need to clip it again, it's just as easy to draw out another one. This doesn't just apply to circles either. You could use any number of shapes, even draw a custom one with the pen tool. As long as you're creating a vector object that goes on top of another object, all you have to do is select both of them together, right-click, and choose Make Clipping Mask, and everything will go just like you see here. If you continue using Illustrator long enough, you're going to run into one of the biggest challenges that any Illustrator user ever faces, and that's the dreaded, "I only have a copy of it as a JPEG" statement from your client. When and if that happens to you, you need to be well equipped in order to convert that JPEG into live vector paths. So in this movie, I'm going to show you how to turn a JPEG-like image into vector artwork using something called Image Trace. Let's go up to the File menu and create a new document first and foremost. And we'll select the print profile just so I can get an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and I'll hit OK. Once I have that created, I'm going to go up to the File menu and choose Place. Inside of the Exercise Files folder, Chapter 13, there's a fashionista.psd file. And when I place this out on the artboard, you'll see exactly what I mean. This is just a fashion sketch. I'll shrink it down a little bit so you can see it. There we go. Let's make sure it fits on the page. And then we can center it up using the alignment controls. Okay, so we want this turned into vector artwork somehow. I could spend hours, days, months, years tracing this with the pen tool, but I'd rather just have sort of a one-click fix. And the image trace is something that can really help expedite that process. So let's go up to the image trace button right here and just click it, see what happens. When you click it the first time, it's going to go through and read, do a bunch of stuff, and you're going to see an initial rendering of this piece of artwork. And the initial rendering, I'll be honest, it's very rarely what you're looking for. In some cases it might be, but in this case you can see there are a lot of things missing and it's not exactly what I need it to be. So, in order to get it really like you need it to be, you need to open up this dialog box right here, the Image Trace panel. When you click on the Image Trace panel, it's going to open this up and you'll be able to see everything. Go ahead and twirl open the advanced options too. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through the ins and outs of every little detail in here. I have a course at lynda.com called Tracing Artwork in Illustrator, and this is the course all about this particular dialog box. Takes you soup to nuts through every single option, what it is, what it does, and how it helps you. But in this case, what we're going to do is just play around with some of the presets. So let's come up here to the preset buttons that go across the top. And the first one, let's just choose Auto Color. See what happens. Each and every time you make a change to something in the Image Trace panel, it's going to have to redraw it on your artboard. And in some cases, that can take a really long time. So if it starts off going slow, you can feel free to pause the video and then come back when it's finished. Now, once I clicked Auto Color, I'm starting to see this looks a little bit more like what I was looking for. It's given itself 25 colors, but I really don't think it needs that many. If you would like to see the before and after of what we're dealing with here, you can go up here and change this to source image. That way you can see the difference between the source image and the tracing result. So here, we're losing a little bit of that gray shadowing and a little bit of the color in the legs, but for the most part, it's getting about 90% of the detail that we need. If we really need all of those colors to convert them to vector, then we might want to consider the high color preset. When I click on that, it's going to take a little bit longer to process because it's really given itself a lot of color. 85 colors this time. It's going with a full tone palette, meaning that it's going to be taking as many of these colors as it can and applying them to the areas that it thinks there's information. Once that happens, you'll see here we get a lot more of the detail back in the image. And if I zoom in, you can really start to see some of the detail coming back in the face and in the hair over here. If you're still not seeing what you need, chances are you need to go down here to the advanced section. You need to play with the paths, corners, and noise setting. The paths setting determines how closely the newly generated paths follow the original outline of the drawing, or how much artistic freedom you're giving Illustrator, basically. So if you don't care that it fits exactly, you can push this lower, and Illustrator will sort of play fast and loose with the rules. But if you need something to look exactly like it did before, you push it higher, and Illustrator tries to be a little bit more strict. When this finishes rendering, you may see some slight changes to the image, but probably not a whole lot. So let's see what it looks like once it finishes here. See, not a whole lot changed whatsoever. So in this case, it really doesn't matter where I have the paths section. Corners? I don't think I'm going to want any corners in here really, so we can take that way down because this is a very fluid, very naturally drawn image, so there's not going to be a whole lot of sharp lines in this. There's a whole lot of curves. So let's just go ahead and make that change. And again, every single time you make a change, this is going to have to re-render what you're doing. The only way it won't re-render what you're doing is if you turn off the preview at the bottom. The final thing that's going to help you pick up some more of the detail is to adjust the noise. It tells you here reduce noise by ignoring areas of specified pixel size. The higher the value, the less noise you will pick up. So in this case, I want to knock this down to something like 1, and let's see if it brings back any of the smaller details in this sketch. Again, we're going to have to wait for it to render, so if yours is taking a while, feel free to pause and come back when it's done. Now that it's all finished up, you can see that subtle shift right there. That means that we've picked up a few more details. I can see some in the hair there, some around the legs, and all those little sketch marks that we have all over. Looks pretty good. So once you're satisfied with the results, there's really not much else to do here. All you have to do is close the image trace panel. This new image trace object is vector. You can scale it up or down without penalty. However, the underlying image is still made of pixels, and therefore, every time you resize it, it may have to go through a rendering. So for instance, if I take this down, you'll see it actually goes through and it has to render just a little bit. So some of this might be a little slow depending on how much it has to do. Here you go, scaling it up. It's going to go through and redo all the pixel clustering and all that stuff that it does. And once it's finished, you'll get a result of what this image looks like scaled up. The only way to avoid this when scaling this up or down is to convert the image into vector paths. And that's a very simple operation, and I'll show you how to do it in the very next movie. Once you've got your image trace object all nailed down the way you want it to be, the easiest way to get it into Illustrator format and to make sure that you don't have to sit through those long rendering times is to do something called expanding the artwork. And you can do this in multiple ways. The easiest way is to click the Expand button right here in the control panel. You can also go to the Object menu and go down to Expand. In either case, you should be aware of one thing here. If you are going to expand your artwork, you're going to lose the ability to customize the image trace settings that you were doing before. So as of right now, anytime I want, I can go into the image trace settings and make a change to any of the settings that we had applied earlier. Those will then re-render and I'll get a totally new version of the artwork. Once I expand it, that capability is gone forever. So it's totally up to you what you do, but in most cases, if you're satisfied with your artwork, you can just go ahead and expand it. So let's close the image trace panel here, and let's just click on the Expand button. When I do that, you're going to see that it instantly changes into vector paths. And if I zoom in, you can see just how many paths it actually created. And if you want to get really crazy, let's press Command or Control 0 on our keyboard, click away from this, and press Command or Control Y. Then zoom in a little bit more, and you can actually see the underlying structure of all of those paths as they were created by the image trace panel. That's pretty crazy. And it does all of that super fast, which I love. Let's go ahead and turn this off with Command or Control Y again and take a look at our finished result. It looks like a pretty fair representation of the original file, so I think I'm pretty happy with it. From here, there would just be some subtle tweaks that I would do with the direct selection tool, maybe the pen, and even the eraser in some cases where I could go in and clean up some of the extra noise. All in all, I think the image trace panel should get you probably about 85 to 90% of the way there, and then the rest is up to you. That's why I saved this for the end of the course. You've already hopefully got the skill set you need to make those final adjustments to this, using things like the pen tool, shape builder, eraser, and all that stuff. That's why we talked about that first, so that when you got to a complex piece of art like this, you'd know what you were doing.